Ezekiel, the story of the prophet who saw the throne of God, Ezekiel's call. The story of the prophet Ezekiel is one of the most vivid and symbolic narratives in the Bible, primarily recorded in the Old Testament's Book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, whose name means God strengthens, was a prophet and priest during one of Israel's most challenging periods, the Babylonian exile. His prophetic ministry began around 593 BCE, 5 years after the Babylonians had taken many Israelites, including Ezekiel, into captivity. Ezekiel's call and vision, recorded in the first 3 chapters of the Book of Ezekiel, are among the most awe-inspiring and mysterious passages in the Bible. Ezekiel was a prophet and priest, and his calling occurred during the early years of the Babylonian exile, around 593 BCE. The vision that marked his prophetic calling is one of the most remarkable divine encounters in the Scriptures. 1. Ezekiel's vision of God's glory, Ezekiel 1. Ezekiel's vision begins with the heavens opening and Ezekiel seeing visions of God while he was among the exiles by the Kebar River. This powerful vision is filled with symbolism and imagery that illustrates the majesty and mystery of God's presence. A stormy cloud and 4 living creatures. Ezekiel first sees a windstorm coming from the north, which symbolizes God's impending judgment. The storm is accompanied by an immense cloud, lightning, and brilliant light. Within the cloud, Ezekiel sees 4 living creatures. These creatures have a human form, but with 4 faces, of a human, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, representing different aspects of creation, humanity, wild animals, domesticated animals, and birds. Each creature has 4 wings, 2 of which are stretched upward while the other 2 cover their bodies, signifying reverence before God. The creatures move in any direction without turning, led by the Spirit. The wheels within wheels. Below the living creatures, Ezekiel sees wheels that intersect each other, described as a wheel within a wheel. These wheels are full of eyes all around, symbolizing God's omniscience and his ability to move and act everywhere at once. The wheels move in harmony with the living creatures, indicating that they operate under divine direction. The imagery of the wheels suggests that God's will is executed throughout the universe with perfect coordination. The throne and the figure of God. Above the creatures is an expanse like sparkling ice, and above this expanse is a throne made of sapphire. Seated on the throne is a figure that appears like a man, glowing with the appearance of fire, surrounded by a brilliant light. The radiance around him is compared to a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, symbolizing God's covenant and mercy. Ezekiel realizes that he is seeing the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Overwhelmed by this vision, Ezekiel falls face down in worship. 2. Ezekiel's commission, Ezekiel 2-3. After this breathtaking vision, Ezekiel hears the voice of God speaking to him. God commissions Ezekiel to be his prophet to the people of Israel, who are described as rebellious and obstinate. Despite their stubbornness, Ezekiel is commanded to speak God's words to them, whether they listen or not. Ezekiel's prophetic role. God refers to Ezekiel as Son of Man, a term that emphasizes his humanity in contrast to God's divine glory. This title is used throughout the book and highlights Ezekiel's role as a representative of the people. God tells Ezekiel that his mission will be challenging because the people of Israel are a rebellious nation, but God will make Ezekiel as resolute as they are stubborn. The scroll. In a symbolic act, God gives Ezekiel a scroll filled with words of lament, mourning, and woe. Ezekiel is commanded to eat the scroll, which tastes as sweet as honey in his mouth. This act represents Ezekiel internalizing God's message, preparing him to deliver it to the people, regardless of its difficult content. God's warning and encouragement. God warns Ezekiel that he will face opposition and resistance from the people, but he should not be afraid or dismayed. Instead, Ezekiel is to speak God's words faithfully and let God handle the outcome. God also tells Ezekiel that he will be held accountable for delivering the message faithfully. If he fails to warn the people of impending judgment, their blood will be on his hands. But if he warns them and they do not listen, Ezekiel will be absolved. The significance of Ezekiel's call. Ezekiel's call and vision emphasize several key themes that are central to his prophetic ministry. God's sovereignty and glory. The vision of God's throne and the living creatures highlights God's majesty, omnipotence, and omnipresence. Despite Israel's exile and the destruction of Jerusalem, God remains in control and is present even in foreign lands. Judgment and mercy. The vision includes elements of judgment, the storm, the fiery figure, and mercy, the rainbow, reflecting the dual themes in Ezekiel's prophecies: God's judgment for sin and his promise of future restoration. Obedience and faithfulness. Ezekiel's call underscores the prophet's responsibility to speak God's truth, regardless of the people's response. Ezekiel's obedience is crucial to his role as a prophet, and his faithfulness is emphasized throughout his ministry. Ezekiel's vision of God's glory and his prophetic commission set the stage for the rest of his ministry, which is marked by powerful visions, symbolic actions, and messages of both judgment and hope for the people of Israel. Ezekiel's call to prophetic ministry is rich in symbolism and contains several key themes that shape not only his ministry, but also the broader message of the Book of Ezekiel. These themes include God's sovereignty and glory, judgment and restoration, obedience and responsibility, the role of the prophet, and divine presence in exile. 1. God's sovereignty and glory. Vision of God's throne. Ezekiel's vision of the divine throne, surrounded by magnificent and mysterious beings, emphasizes God's sovereignty over all creation. The imagery of the storm, the living creatures, and the throne signifies that God's rule is not limited by geographical boundaries, such as Israel's land, or political power, like that of Babylon. This theme reassures the exiled Israelites that, even though they are far from their homeland, God is still in control. The glory of God. The radiant, fiery figure seated on the throne represents the glory of God, a recurring theme in Ezekiel's ministry. God's glory had departed from the temple in Jerusalem due to the people's sins, but this vision shows that God's presence remains active and sovereign even in exile. 2. Judgment and restoration. Message of judgment. Ezekiel's call introduces the theme of judgment, as God describes the Israelites as rebellious and obstinate. Ezekiel's prophetic messages often focus on the judgment that will come upon Israel for their idolatry, injustice, and covenant unfaithfulness. The storm and the fiery appearance of God in the vision symbolize impending judgment. Hope for restoration. Despite the strong emphasis on judgment, Ezekiel's vision also hints at restoration. The appearance of the rainbow in the vision of God's throne alludes to God's covenant with Noah, a promise of mercy following judgment. Throughout Ezekiel's ministry, messages of hope and restoration are woven alongside the warnings of judgment, promising that God will eventually renew his people. 3. Obedience and responsibility. Ezekiel's commission. A central theme in Ezekiel's call is the prophet's responsibility to obey God's commands, even when the message is difficult or unpopular. God tells Ezekiel that whether the people listen or not, he must speak the words given to him. Ezekiel's act of eating the scroll, filled with lamentation, symbolizes his acceptance of God's message, internalizing it fully so he can deliver it faithfully. Accountability. God also emphasizes the prophet's accountability. If Ezekiel fails to warn the people as instructed, he will be held responsible for their fate. This theme of responsibility underscores the seriousness of the prophetic mission and the importance of speaking God's truth without compromise. 4. The role of the prophet. Prophet as watchman. Ezekiel's call highlights the role of the prophet as a watchman, a guardian who must warn the people of impending danger. Ezekiel is called to be vigilant and to act as a spokesperson for God, ensuring that the people hear God's words, whether they heed them or not. This role involves both spiritual insight and the courage to confront a rebellious audience. Prophetic suffering. Ezekiel's call also foreshadows the suffering and isolation that often accompany prophetic ministry. God warns Ezekiel that the people will be unresponsive and rebellious, indicating that the path of obedience will be difficult. Yet Ezekiel is empowered to stand firm, made as hard as flint by God, so that he can endure the opposition he will face. 5. Divine presence in exile. God's presence beyond Jerusalem. A crucial theme in Ezekiel's call is the idea that God's presence is not confined to the temple in Jerusalem. The vision of God's glory appearing to Ezekiel by the Kebar River in Babylon challenges the Israelites' traditional understanding of God's dwelling place. Even in exile, far from the temple, God reveals himself to Ezekiel, showing that he is with his people wherever they are. This theme provides comfort to the exiles and redefines their relationship with God during the period of displacement. Conclusion. Ezekiel's call introduces profound themes that resonate throughout the rest of his ministry. God's sovereignty, the dual messages of judgment and restoration, the importance of prophetic obedience, and the presence of God, even in exile, all serve as foundations for Ezekiel's prophetic work. These themes not only guide Ezekiel's mission, but also offer deep theological insights into God's relationship with his people during one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. Ezekiel's ministry continues throughout the Book of Ezekiel, where he delivers prophecies of judgment against Israel and the surrounding nations. However, his prophecies also include visions of hope and restoration, culminating in the famous vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, symbolizing the resurrection and renewal of the people of Israel. Ezekiel's prophetic role is unique, blending powerful symbolism, divine visions, and a call to faithfulness in the face of adversity. His story remains a profound example of God's call to speak truth, regardless of the challenges faced.